Well, welcome everybody to this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Israa Nasir. Isra, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Abhay. I'm very excited for the conversation we'll have.
It's morning for me here, and I'm just curious. In general, people try and start their days in a more harmonized and synchronized way, especially given the subject matter of what we're about to talk about. But
Mhm.
I'm so curious. Do you have a mental health or hygiene practice that really helps you stay harmonized and something that you're very disciplined about? Whether
Yeah.
it starts your day or whether it's something that you try and practice on a daily basis.
Yeah. So recently, in the last 3 years, something I've developed, and I've realized that it became a powerful game changer for the quality of my day, is really practicing something called a slow morning.
Mm,
And, when we think about slow mornings, a lot of times we think about these long stretches of time where we're waking up at the crack of dawn and doing an hour of journaling, an hour of meditating. And those things can be helpful for some people. It's just not the most realistic thing for me. But that
yeah.
doesn't mean that we can't have those things. So a slow morning has become extremely non negotiable for me. And that really all that means is I try to wake up between 20 to 30 minutes before I'm supposed to get
Yeah.
whatever done. And all I do is I put on music. So I wake up slowly, I put on music while I'm, brushing my teeth, doing my skincare, and then I make breakfast and coffee and I sit and I have that a screen without my emails, without my going on social media. So I think that just that's it. Like I'm not actually doing anything else that's known as like, the mindful meditation techniques. I'm not doing that in the
Sure.
morning because I can't. That's just not part of it's just not realistic for me. But I
Yeah.
am just the very act of sitting and paying attention to my coffee and my breakfast and just being still, that itself is very rejuvenating. And that is honestly a non-negotiable to me now. Even if I have to wake up super early for, let's say, an airport, I'll still wake up 20 minutes before the
Yeah.
time that I have to and do the thing. So it's been really great.
As someone who misses flights once every 13 years,
Oh,
I probably should employ that a little bit more,
yeah.
especially and I mean, it's a there's a time-based aspect to it, but I appreciate what you just said about the stillness aspect to it, right? I mean,
Mhm,
it's really the decluttering of things that, both technology and
mhm,
tasks can
mhm.
put in front of you. And it sounds like, is this something that, for you required I know for me it would require practice. Is this something that for you just sort of has built up that iterative muscle memory, if you will, particularly as you've done it, so frequently now?
You no, I say that
Huh.
because I'm actually not doing anything. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like I didn't need to build in a habit. I'm actually doing nothing.
Mm,
If you really think about it, right? So, like, I wake up and I brush my teeth and do all the things, then I'm just sitting.
yeah.
And so I am a content creator. I create mental health education pieces for social media. And it, you're supposed to kind of post first thing in the morning because people are opening up their phones first thing in the morning. And that used to really kind of start my day off poorly, just getting up and hitting posts or whatever. So, you leveraging technology to schedule these posts to go out automatically has really been helpful. So, I think that's one thing that I shifted. I
Mm,
started searching around to see what I can leverage to get the auto posts out so I don't have to open the apps.
right.
And that I guess like but I didn't really have to build in a practice. It was really just waking up 15 minutes early, then pushing it to 20, then pushing it to 25, and
Yeah.
then now it's 30 minutes.
I'm curious also, where you perhaps sounds like that energizes you in a way, right? Because you're doing nothing.
Mhm.
I'm curious where you draw your energy from in that sense. Also, does the energy value for you actually are you someone who draws energy from people around you, or actually from that stillness, from within yourself? And, I know some people, does this make you, if you're someone who's an extrovert or an introvert, does it make you toggle back and forth between conversations or even the solace of that quiet reflection in a way? How do you draw your energy from people in that way?
As a very classic Libra, I'm in the middle. So I'm neither an extrovert nor an introvert. I'm something that's known as an ambivert,
Yeah.
which means that depending on the situation, I can feel very energized by people around me, or I can find that depleting and I need time on my own. One thing is for sure about me is I certainly need to have solo time at least once a week where I'm just on my own, and I find that very, very rejuvenating. And that means I'm not on social media either. So when I'm with myself, I'm just with myself.
Mm,
Sometimes just listening to music, going for a walk. I often go on bi-weekly dinner dates with myself or lunch dates with myself.
yeah.
So I think as a whole, I do find some solo time to be rejuvenating.
Yeah.
But I also need to be around people to kind of feel a little bit more energized depending on the situation. But starting your morning, at least for me, starting my day from a place of stillness really just gives me a sense of grounding. More
Mm,
than energy, it gives me a sense of grounding and rootedness so that I'm not overwhelmed.
yeah.
I've learned through the years that I'm somebody who can become very easily overwhelmed. It's kind of sometimes it's kind of like a bag of marbles has exploded and everything is just going everywhere. And, my not to be very jargony, but, my nervous system is very dysregulated often because I'm doing so many things. And it's kind of this like toxic productivity mindset, which is like, I'm just trying to do everything all the
Yeah.
time for everyone. And so this idea of like a slow morning just kind of happened by chance. But once I started feeling the benefits of it, I became more intentional about it.
There are people whose lives are intertwined with partnerships and spouses and significant others and whatnot. And how do you approach? How do you tell people to approach those slow mornings when their partners or their families' mornings are anything but slow?
Yeah. So, especially if you have kids, I think it's very challenging. I don't
Yeah.
have children, but I was a child before, and I remember that chaos of the
Right.
morning. It's very challenging. And my partner, he is like a true extrovert. Like,
Yeah.
there could not be more of an extrovert than him, so we're very different in that way. And then, if you think about the biology of between, biological males and females, and you probably know this more as a medical professional, like we're waking up with different hormones. Like men are waking up at
Mm,
their peak, and like women they kind of go through the cycle over 30 days, right?
yeah.
And so I think just kind of being in touch with your own body's rhythm is really important. Because a slow morning works for me, doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone.
Right.
So the point I really like to hone in on is find the thing that works for you in your circumstance. So as a therapist, that's something I really help people feel empowered in. If you have children and your mornings are chaotic, think about what needs to change to just shift one aspect of your morning. And a
Mm,
lot of times, good mornings are made the night before. So, can you prep some stuff? Can you empower your children to prep their outfits the night before? Small
right.
things like leaving the socks out with the shoes the night before so you're not scrummaging for them in the morning. That's kind of how I built up like a gym practice is I would really struggle to get my life together to get put gym clothes on in the morning. So I just lay them out the night before the mornings I have to go to the gym in the morning. So it's just kind of like shifting small habits
Yeah.
wherever you can. Because making a full routine change, if you have a partner, if you have children, if you have like parents you're caring for, that's like, it feels impossible. So
Right.
if you can just shift small things to enable yourself to start moving towards the ideal state, you're not going to get to the ideal state right away. So even for me, I started off with waking up only 15 minutes earlier, right?
Yeah.
And still just being able to listen to music and do my skincare, but still eat breakfast while doing my emails. And then I
Yeah.
just expanded it by 5 minutes and 5 minutes. And it took like 3, 4 months. It didn't just happen. It's hard to break habits, even though they seem very small.
Hey, and that's what I meant by the iterative practice, where you sort of like you
Yeah.
get to a steady state and
Yeah.
you build up this kind of cachet of
Mhm.
success. And a lot of
Mhm.
what you're talking about, I mean, at least in my house, the pre prep of what you're talking about involves does the car have gas in it for my children, that kind of thing. And
Yeah, yeah,
that can be a, but meal prep is what makes meals successful. So
yeah.
planning ahead of time and all those things are wonderful. You mentioned the ability to be still, especially to quiet down that kind of toxic productivity spin that's going on in your head, often. And I'm curious, how you particularly stay driven while also quieting those inner voices, right? Whether that's an inner critic, it's an inner guide that's constantly telling you to achieve or do something, or get that thing done today. How do you maintain that kind of drive and ambition while also remaining still and quieting those voices?
That's a really good question, and it's one that I explore in detail in the book. And the reason it even came about is because of my own personal experience with this. So, this is something that I definitely struggled with a lot, especially in my 20s, of seeing rest as the enemy to progress, seeing taking breaks as antithetical to success.
Mm.
And that's the inner critic voice that's constantly telling you to keep moving. And the journey that I really had to take that started off with just doing research on this topic because I was trying to understand how I can break these habits myself
Yeah.
is really framing and actually even to the end point is to redefine productivity to include rest and stillness in it, but that's a really big ask at the upfront. So starting off with just kind of like reframing those inner critical thoughts to seeing how you can transform them into something more helpful. So if I am sitting and the thoughts begin, it's like, oh my gosh, it's like 8:50, like you should have started already. You should have started already.
Right.
It's the should statements.
Yeah.
I have to really stop myself now and have a conversation with myself and say things like that are validating. So it's okay if it's 8:50. You're meant to start at 9 anyway, right?
Mm.
Or things like that are completely reframing as if you don't finish this well right now, you're going to be stressed the rest of the day. Then you're going to get really tired in the afternoon. You have a long day. Like, you're actually talking through.
By
And
the way, are those
yeah,
do you sometimes, because some people have a difficult time having that conversation with themselves, they need coaches, they need,
yeah.
visuals, they need post-its
Mhm,
someplace like slow
mhm,
down. It's 8:50, you're okay, that kind of thing.
yeah. So mine is just kind of like a mental thing because I think as a child, I was very like imaginative play was a very big thing for me. So I
Yeah.
think it's just like a natural skill that I have that I can kind of mentally talk myself through it.
Yeah.
However, I think for people who are more visual, having like something that I recommend people do is when you're actually in a good state of mind, open up a notes in your note app, and when you're in that positive or healthy or balanced state of mind, write down the things that are going to be helpful to you.
Mm.
Trying to think of stuff when you're in a crisis is very unhelpful because it doesn't usually happen. So you can
Right.
keep it in your notes app. You can have visual reminders. I have a friend who has, you can download this app that changes the wallpaper of your phone to
Mm.
various affirmations on a time clock, like every 20 minutes, it shifts to a new affirmation and it's just on your desk, on your wallpaper. So you're not actually getting a notification for it because we have
Yeah.
notification fatigue. So, like, trying to get creative in ways like that is really helpful. Having a set place where you have your breakfast or your coffee. Again, like, the more you ritualize it, the less powerful the inner critic becomes.
Mm.
So, in the
Yeah.
beginning, you might need the reminder, but eventually it's something that becomes just a part of the way you're thinking.
Has that been the experience for you where, as you have begun to ritualize this, and especially with surprises, right? I mean, transitions.
Mm,
Younger children go through this where they find it really difficult to navigate through transitions, or the surprise that comes by because the ritual gets broken.
yeah.
So, when you're trying to quiet those voices a little bit and quiet that critic in you, when there are surprises or shocks to the system, how do you sort of brace for that? Does that also require a lot of, kind of forethought and practice and skill?
So something I laugh about with my sister a lot is, so I'm big on rituals, right?
Yeah.
But the problem with rituals is if one is disrupted, it's kind of like a domino effect on the day, and
Right.
you're just like, why do I even have rituals? Because
Yeah.
it feels limiting, but it's actually not. Yes. So one important part of building healthy habits, whatever eating well, sleeping better, whatever it is, like not using your phone, is to bake in a contingency plan.
Mm.
And that's part of building a ritual. That's part of, and of course, when you work with children, you have to adapt it in a way that's developmentally appropriate.
Sure.
And my experience with children is very, very limited. But with adults, is you, when you plan for it, when you're sitting it down and you're thinking about how you want to build in this new habit, you are thinking about things that are disruptive, like vacations, right?
Right.
Like stressful periods at work. Some people, due to their professions, they already know seasons that are very busy, like accountants, for example, right?
Yeah.
Or dentists, like the end of the year is really busy for dentists because people are trying to use up their, their benefits. And
Yep.
so knowing the baseline of your life is really important when you think about building new habits. And rituals are really powerful because they are anchoring, right?
Mm.
You recognize that I have these anchor points in my day, in my week, that will activate me into doing these things. And when the rituals are disrupted, my recommendation, and this is something I practice, is to compress the ritual. So
Mm.
if you can't do 100% of the whole thing that day, just do 20%. That's okay. One thing that, so something I struggle with a lot is regularly like exercising at the gym. I can go to classes, Pilates and yoga, like that's great, but that weight training piece is very hard for me
Sure.
because I just was not a very athletic person as a young child. And so when I don't have the solid 60 minutes to work out, I'll just take the workouts that my trainer has given me and do it for 30 minutes.
Mm.
And I even asked her, I was like, hey, can you just create two workouts for me? One is at 160, one is 30, because at least I can get some done. So
Yeah.
when we think about positive habits, we don't want to get into this like 0, 1 binary mindset. Just even if you can do 80%, you can do 20%, do what you can for that day, and it's still a win.
Yeah, I mean, really building in. I love how that's kind of baked into everything, right? That the ritual doesn't have to be a 100%,
Mhm.
zero versus one binary, but being able to get graduated results is also, super beneficial. And of course,
Mhm.
us as South Asians, we're no strangers to ritualization of things. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, for someone like you and your own sort of formative background growing up in multiple cultures with lots of having this kind of South Asian cultural backdrop and heritage, was this all was your cultural background at all an accelerator to tackling and addressing this issue of toxic productivity in a way? Did that sort of tee up this conversation for you?
That is such an interesting question. You know, I think certain aspects of toxic productivity, and this is really just an like the output of the way my family operates. The foundation for this kind of like toxic level of high achievement and needing to always be optimizing, and so I think that does definitely come from my family background.
Sure.
And when I think about like the mornings and the chaotic mornings and like the false sense of urgency, I think a lot of that does come from the foundation of my parents, specifically more my mom. My dad is a little bit more chill, but, and this is not a knock on them. I love them, and I
Sure,
honestly
sure.
had a
And
very
by the
peaceful.
way, the immigrant story probably
Yeah.
resonates for a lot of people, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the thing, like, like as immigrants, you kind of are in survival mode, right? So it's not even
yeah,
like something that my parents were intentionally maliciously doing. It's the thing that helped them get out of survival into
yeah,
thriving. So, my parents were caught up in the 1971 war between Bangladesh and Pakistan. So they were displaced in that war as a minority. And so that already starts you at survival mode, right? That
sure.
starts you at this false sense of urgency. And I think this is a story a lot of South Asians, diaspora adults can really identify with, because we have this intergenerational component of trauma. Our
Yeah,
grandparents lived in partition. They pass down that nervous system dysregulation, the scarcity mindset, the I need to do everything now. They pass it to
Right.
their kids who are our parents. And then our parents pass it to us because we then immigrated from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Afghanistan
Yeah.
to the Middle East or to North America or Europe. And then they had to start all over again, right? And
Yep.
so there is this compounding effect in immigrant experiences that really sets the stage for toxic productivity to take hold.
Yeah.
And then you layer that on with the South Asian culture of excellence, right? We do have this idea that, we have to be the best at everything because that's how we win, right? That's how we win at
Yeah.
life. Then you layer in the model minority myth. Then you layer in socioeconomic things, right? Like the more you layer it, the more foundational this belief becomes that
Mm.
we have to keep moving and doing and achieving in order to be valued, right? And then that just locks in. And that's
Let
been
me
my
ask.
experience for sure.
Yeah, and let me ask something about that. I mean, it's how, of course, immigrants and this kind of backstory for many folks in the diaspora becomes, a signature in a way, and maybe makes people prone to this kind of behavior. And then, is it important in some ways to not fool yourself into separating out pride with that? On the one hand, of course, don't want to necessarily have that drive everything about you, where it's a scarcity mindset, it's an urgency mindset, it's a excellence, at all costs.
Mhm.
And yet, there is great pride also in, what our achievements are as a community.
Yeah.
How do you kind of, in a way, really sort of integrate those two together?
Yeah. So, the way I think about it, and this is kind of the argument I make in the book, is the opposite of toxic productivity is not the absence of productivity.
Yeah.
It is
Yep.
healthy productivity. So, when we think about pride in our achievements, we have to think about at what cost are we pursuing this achievement? And that's really the most important question for us to think about. Is there are seasons in your life where you really have to push through, right? Let's say you're an entrepreneur, you're raising around, like, yes, you have to push through. However, even in that period, even that very tight period of like heavy deadlines, if you don't prioritize rest, it's going to affect your bottom line
Of
eventually,
course.
right?
Yeah.
So again, it's like thinking about, at what cost am I pursuing this achievement and how am I getting in my own way? How is my desire for pride getting in my own way of achieving things in a sustainable manner? So
Mm.
for me, we want to make our productivity sustainable. We want to make it something that is constantly kind of going through instead of something that goes up and down, ebbs and flows, where we push ourselves, then we burn out, then we push ourselves, then we burn out. And there's nothing wrong with feeling pride or wanting to be high achieving. That's definitely something I want to clarify, and I want people to realize that it's really important that we feel good about the things that we do.
Mm.
But when we overdo it, we stop feeling good about it. We
Yeah.
just feel like we have to do it. We should do it. We must do it. And then it becomes a very joyless experience.
I love that. There's this great, I think, reminder to redefine and in some ways kind of, at least for me personally, constantly remind myself that the should part is always relative, right? I mean, that
Mm,
should voice is
mhm.
something to maybe quiet down as well. And
Yeah.
and in the book, I imagine there's a lot. I know there's a lot about managing trigger words, trigger emotions, whether that's shame or guilt or perfectionism. And, why do you think, in a way, those emotions and triggers are at the core of this sort of toxic and unhealthy productivity? Going to make you wear your therapist hat for a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, these are really all swirls, and they're not necessarily always kind of siloed out. But why are those, so important to really call out and really recognize and try and manage?
One of the reasons that's so important is because those intense emotions are often connected to core emotional needs. And these are like our biological drivers for connection, for acceptance, for love. for respect. These are things that are kind of hard coded in us. And so these emotions such as guilt, shame, they really activate a primal fear of being rejected by the group, by your in group, right? Whether it's your family, your peers. And so what happens is the mechanics and the dynamics are so deep inside us that we don't realize that they are now in the driver's seat. And that's why I think most of the productivity literature is focused on habit changes. Is that
Mm,
how can you have like optimize your habit changes? And even we've been talking about that, right? Because that's the most tangible impact we can make.
right.
However, if the emotional dynamics are still moving in the space of fear, shame, guilt, comparing yourself to others, not feeling good enough, you can make the habit changes and they'll last, but eventually your primal fears will take over. And those are really
Yeah.
hard to talk yourself out of if you don't even know what's driving it. And so, thinking about what is the core emotional need that I am trying to fulfill as I pursue achievement at all costs will really help you start to deconstruct it. And
Yeah.
this foundation is laid so early on. You're a
Sure.
pediatrician, like you probably see this all the time. Parents knowingly can use shame as a weapon against their children. Like they don't even mean to, right? Especially in South Asian culture, comparison is a parenting technique,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
look at those people's children, look at that
Right.
person's kid, and what are they going to say about this? And I know this because I heard this a lot, right? And it instills this fear that I will not be accepted by my parents if I am
It,
not
it
good.
it's
And
striking
yeah,
how much both, kind of toxic stressors and adverse childhood experiences are so woven into,
totally.
what we do as adults. And also, as important are those great accelerators when you have
Mhm.
sort of the opposites of those are also really apparent when you see adults who don't have all those kind of core problematic triggers that are there as well.
Yeah.
One thing that it made me think of is, you talk about these sort of core emotions, and I'm curious for you whether there were, um, it's always a work in progress, of course, but I'm curious for you whether there were some moments of reckoning that kind of helped you to redefine your own relationship with productivity.
Yes, there were two really powerful ones, and I talk about it in the book as well. But one is I'm a therapist. I've been a therapist for 10 years. And so the assumptions people make about therapists is that, we have it all figured out in our own heads. But it was
Right.
really, it was really like 4 years ago when I first recognized the shame I have around
Yeah.
achievement behaviors and how shame operates for me. It's just something I just was not aware of. And I am a fairly self-aware person, but I never transitioned into recognizing that. And it really took a incident at work where there was a little bit of like kind of like a racialized experience that I was on the
Hmm.
receiving end of. And I just completely was frozen. Like my freeze response
Yeah.
completely got activated. And in deconstructing that moment with my therapist over the next few months of like, it was my first racialized encounter as well. So I'd
Sure.
never been on the receiving end of this kind of stuff, especially in the workplace.
Yeah.
So in deconstructing that, that's when we kind of got to the place where I was like, wait, I operate from a lot of shame around being good enough,
Yep.
and then I realized that I was always the good student, the good daughter. Teachers loved me, my parents, like I was like, the child they didn't really worry that much about when it came to
Are
academics and
you an
stuff.
oldest child, by the way?
No, I'm the oldest daughter. I'm the
Yeah.
middle child. And I was just like temperamentally a little, just a chill kid. And I like to read a lot. And so I feel like that kind of transforms the way parents react to you.
Yeah.
And so that was one incident that I was like, oh, wow, like this is part of why I overwork myself. And, it distresses me so much.
Sure.
Um, and so that was one really big one. And the second is I found a journal entry from when I was like 20 while I was doing research for the book and I was kind of going through my own things. And the journal entry was so sad. It was I think I wrote down the sentence in stillness is death.
Mm,
Stagnant waters hold no value. And I must have been 21. And I would just kind of felt sad for my younger self who really just had such an antagonistic view on rest,
sure.
and
Yeah,
then I think about all the decisions I made in my 20s, which some of them are so amazing and fun and it got me great outcomes. But, I think I did struggle with burnout for a long time.
of course. And reading that itself, right? Coming to that moment of reckoning, that sort of aha moment. I wonder if in writing the book and in having this kind of our expression so that you can address both of those kind of
Mm.
moments of reckoning. Was there a catharsis with this process for you that sort of allowed you the space, the template, the playbook almost to really address both of those concerns or both those incidents, I guess?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of like acceptance and awareness. Like I
Yeah,
think I learned a lot about myself and the book is not particularly a very personal book. Like there's definitely a lot of me in there and lots of
sure.
client like amalgamations, but it's because it's not a memoir, it's not supremely personal, but I
Yeah,
definitely think that I can catch myself when I'm doing the emotional dynamic that is harmful. Like at
yeah,
least I can kind of name it. So I kind of have this like observational, like whatever the phrase is, like 30 foot, 300,000
yeah,
feet above, like an aerial view of myself. So I
yeah.
can
The
definitely
the
catch
drone view of Isra.
yes, the drone view of me, yeah. And I think there was like an acceptance to it. Like I was like, okay,
Yeah,
like this is how I'm operating and I don't want to operate like this anymore.
yeah,
And the one thing I do want to say and I want people to kind of know this is when we think about productivity and achievement behavior, we often think of the archetype as the type A person. I'm a type B person. And I know it doesn't sound like that because I have all these habits in place now to kind of keep it structured, but
sure.
type B people can also struggle with productivity,
Hmm.
like toxic productivity. It looks like avoidance behaviors. It looks like procrastination. It looks like a lot of overthinking, analysis paralysis. So
Yeah.
it's not just that people who are very type A are struggling, it's really anybody who has a connection between their self-worth and their achievements can struggle with toxic productivity.
I wonder about, and this is sort of a thought that just popped into my head that
Yeah.
it's a kind of a question that's steeped in some kind of circular irony, but
Mhm.
there's this kind of mirrored harmony of achievements, whether you're type A or type B, and this mirrored you know harmony of achievements and productivity that's itself involved in writing and publishing a book.
Mhm.
um, and maybe recognizing the strategy and the exercises involved to make that process peaceful and non-toxic
Mhm.
are itself kind of, I don't know if that makes sense, but itself, the substrate for how you are really going through and practicing the things that I'm sure are in the book itself.
You are
Did you
100%.
find some struggle with that in saying, hey, I have deadlines, I have, making a book is no joke in 2024.
No, my goodness. No, it's certainly not. And so, absolutely. When I started the book, I approached it with a very toxic productivity mindset. I was like, I'm going to
Yeah,
finish this manuscript in 10 months.
right,
Like, it
of
literally
course.
took me 24 months, actually,
Right.
April to April.
Yeah,
But yeah, so I definitely, and I share some of these stories in the book itself where I taught, it's kind of like a meta awareness. Like
yeah,
I'm actually writing about the toxic productivity stuff that I'm struggling with as I write the book.
right, right,
And I was having dinner with a friend a couple of months ago near the close to the end of the book. And she was kind of asking me how I'm doing. And I was just kind of like rambling on about like all the other things that I was doing besides writing the book because I
right.
was consulting, I was working as a therapist, I'd make digital content, I do workshops for corporations. And she stopped me mid sentence and she said, "Are you struggling with toxic productivity?" And I
Right.
was so embarrassed and we laughed about it. And so yes, so there was a little bit of like a meta experience
Yeah. Yeah.
because I didn't start writing this book after I figured it all out. I figured it out a little bit near the second half of the
Yeah.
book where I was like, "Oh, these are things I'm doing right now." And the slow mornings really came out of that. Now to kind of tie
Yeah.
back to the beginning, the slow
Right.
mornings came out of that because I was having a lot of writer's block.
Yeah.
And I was realizing that I'm having writer's block when I'm cramming my schedule, when I'm just
Mm.
getting up and running to my call, like opening up my laptop and doing too many things. And so in the book, I talk about strategies of streamlining your calendar so you can actually do the things that align with you and that has more sustainability versus doing the things that you should be doing. And when you have
I've
to do the things you should be doing, like deadlines, how can you
yeah.
find purpose in that? How can you transform that so that it can be meaningful?
I've read and seen lots of content related back to these like sort of hacks, right? That you're trying to, maximize things and become more efficient. But is that just a mask for actually seeking more and more productivity in the end?
The
And I
ha
ask this because I'm
Mm,
I'm at a stage where I'm actually, I'm actually wanting to shed tasks,
mm,
right? I mean, I
mhm.
want to let go more. And I don't feel guilty about that, but am I just fooling myself and masking the toxic productivity with trying to become more efficient? Does that make sense? And I'm going
Yes.
to solicit some free mental health advice here.
I love this question because it's a really common one. One of
Yeah.
the core tenets of toxic productivity is the mask of efficiency, for sure,
Yeah.
right? The way it becomes healthy is if you are using the efficiency to clear up time, not so that you can put more things in.
Right.
Right. So being really intentional about the tasks, the commitments, and not just in work, but your personal life. I mean, you said that you have children, right?
I do. I have a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old.
Yeah, so when they're younger, a lot of times parents like kind of slam the schedules with like 14 different after school things without
Yes.
realizing that that's a commitment to them as well.
Right.
Right? So it's like being intentional. Am I being efficient so I can squeeze more things in? Or am I being efficient so I can make gaps in my calendar? And am
Yeah.
I being efficient so that I'm doing the thing that is aligned with my values, that will give me the outcome that will make me happy,
Mm.
not the outcome that will check a box.
Right.
Right. And so it's kind
Right.
of being intentional about that. I don't think the hacks are necessarily harmful,
Mm.
but if you're approaching it from the mindset of needing to do more so you can feel good about yourself, then that does become harmful.
Let me ask you this. I mean, we're speaking with a common thread of having South Asian backgrounds and heritages, and
Yeah.
are there specific conversations that we kind of should be having in this global South Asian community with all the things that we've mentioned here, but
Mhm.
particularly about steering toward that healthy productivity? How
Yeah.
do we? I mean, we can do this as individuals. How do we do this as a collective?
So I think two things need to shift. This is just my perspective.
Yeah.
The one cultural shift that needs to happen for us as South Asians is we need to step away from the timeline. We are very timeline oriented people, which is kind of ironic because we're never on time. Like Brown Standard Time is a thing, and
Right.
I have a lot of endearment for a lot of things in our culture.
Yeah.
But we are very timeline oriented, right? We have to finish. I remember my mom telling me that I should try to finish undergrad like 1 year early for no
Right.
reason.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
for the sake of doing it, right?
Yeah.
I took a gap year in the middle between undergrad and master's, and that was like a very foreign thing to my mom. She was like, what are you
Right.
doing?
What are you doing?
What are
Right.
you doing? Why is this
Yeah.
happening? So this timeline thing, then like, undergrad, master's, job, marriage, house, first kid, second, right? Like we
Children. Right.
constantly move
Yep.
through this. So we need to step away from that because that really locks in well with the toxic productivity mindset. It's
Yeah.
like the prime background for that to develop because that activates shame. That
Sure.
activates the fear of being kicked out of your community or being rejected from the people who love you and that kind of stuff. The second shift that we need to make is is kind of connected to the first one, is we need to open ourselves up to non-traditional lifestyles,
Yeah.
non-traditional paths of living, because the pressure eases a little bit. And this is within
Sure.
the context of South Asians, right? So, you know, when I was growing up, like you had four careers, right? You were, and I'm not
Right.
even being stereotypical, you were either an engineer, a lawyer, something in medicine, or
Sure.
teaching type of jobs, right? But now I'm seeing this new outcrop of, you know, younger Gen Alpha, Gen Z South Asians who are pursuing non-traditional paths, right?
Yeah.
They are pursuing creative arts and they are pursuing entrepreneurship. And I think
Literally everything.
even, yeah, even
Yeah.
not having children, not
Yeah.
getting married, right? I think all of that will shift our cultural mindset of needing to be a certain way so that we can achieve. The
Mm,
way that happens is very slow. It's
yeah.
generational. I'm seeing millennial South Asian parents redo, or sorry, break through the cycles, change some of their parenting habits. I think that is one way. And the second way is, like, if you're not a parent, or you won't be a parent, is to talk about it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
something that I like as a therapist. That's my niche. I work with predominantly Asian, you know, children of immigrants, who are in life transition or who are choosing non-traditional life paths. So empowering people to talk about it, give it language, help them navigate setting boundaries that are appropriate to our culture, right?
Yeah.
Help them navigate finding community. And I think that that is something that is really important. We need champions from within our community who talk about it. So one
I
of the
love
things I
that.
talk about a lot, this is a little bit of a personal thing, is like, you know, I'm choosing not to have kids. As a
Yeah.
Muslim Pakistani person, that is like
Right.
probably the saddest thing, and for my mom.
Yeah, I know. And that itself is so sad, right? That like that
Yeah,
has to be a strange conversation as opposed
for
to
sure.
something we
Yeah,
celebrate and accept. And
yeah.
I think you're right. Like getting rid of timelines, having more dialogue, having more
Mhm,
conversation is huge. And you
mhm.
mentioned the word boundary, and I'll try and get you out of here on this one.
Sure.
In the end, I imagine that we save a lot of energy if we were just more content and more
Mm, mhm,
conscious of
mhm.
boundaries at any given time. And I imagine that helps us to stay healthy and to stay, in harmony in a way. So what do you do both to be at peace with these boundaries, to be content, but again, also satisfy and be empathic to those in different generations with different
Mm,
mindsets,
mhm.
who are making their way towards being content, making their way towards changing those boundaries. And how do we, again, find a way to sort of connect the dots here so that we can eliminate, um, some of the barriers to making those boundaries? That's a weird way to put that, but
Yeah.
hopefully that makes sense.
It does. And I'll try to answer from the way I understood your question.
Yeah.
I think when we think about setting boundaries in our communities around this type of stuff, right? Like achievement, career paths, stuff like that. The notion is that it needs to be this like statement. I need to like put up this wall and now I'm just stating this and you have to accept it. And how you accept it is your problem. That's not the way to do it. We
Mm,
have to build relational boundaries because we are constantly in relation because our culture is collectivist, right? And
yeah.
so, barring abusive power dynamics, like this is not for that situation, is having your boundaries in dialogue. So, really understanding where your parents are coming from or where your grandparents are coming from. Like, why is this so hard for them to accept? What are their fears? Like, as parents, like, irrespective of culture, parents are just afraid something bad will happen to their kids, right?
Right.
That's just the core fear, and that manifests as not accepting interracial marriages, that
Yeah.
manifests as not accepting like your queer children. But the core in there is that they're afraid. They're afraid
Yeah.
something bad will happen. And so trying to access that piece, trying to understand where your parents are coming from when they are having a hard time with a choice that you're making, and continuously having an open dialogue with them. So the way I did it, especially in trying to help my mom understand my choices, is first understand where she was coming from. What were her fears? Why did she feel this way? What were the misconceptions? That was one conversation. Then there was another conversation about like another thing, right? Like, so we had these like a year of actually a year of conversations. And
Mhm.
in that year, I, as you as the child, try to understand that I'm going to be in exploration phase. So I'm not going to take their stuff personally. Whatever they feel about this choice is an outcome of the way that they were raised. It doesn't
Sure.
have anything to do with me. And that is a journey that you have to take in accepting that your parents will be disappointed in you. When you get over the fear that your parents will be disappointed in you, you can set the boundary in a healthy way without kind of jeopardizing the relationship. So
Yeah.
we have a great relationship, even though my mom fully does not agree with my choice, right?
Right.
But I talk to her literally 4 times a day, and she lives in Toronto.
Yeah.
So I think it's that piece in understanding where they're coming from and just making sure that their opinions doesn't impact your decisions and not taking their things personally. And that's if you have the privilege of having these conversations, I
Sure.
understand.
Yeah.
If you don't have the privilege of having these conversations, I think it's much harder. You have to have the conversation differently. Sometimes you need to create a little bit of space, between whether you talk to them about it, whether you bring it up, you limit certain conversation topics. But the work of accepting that your parents will be disappointed in you is internal. And we have to do it ourselves with our therapists, with our journals. And it's very hard for sure.
Yeah.
As a
Yeah.
recovering good girl, I can tell you that. So yeah, it's I could talk about this forever. Like I love this
Well,
conversation.
I was going to say, understanding where people are coming from and tackling toxic productivity and really developing great dialogue about all these things. Isra, thank you so much for joining us. This was really a treat, and I hope we can visit with you again down the line.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Your questions were very insightful.
You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Stay tuned.